Hello, and welcome to our November 2017 Hot Topic, Project Management Basics, with our invited feet-on-the-street expert, Robin Hastings of Northeast Kansas Library System, and your innovative moderators, myself, Nanette Knott, Senior Consultant, here, your session moderator, and my colleague, Ann Talley, chat moderator. But before we go any further, let's put some faces with these names in my voice. I'm Nanette Knott. As I said, the photo on the far left, that's Robin, our main presenter for the day in the center, and my colleague, Ann, your chat moderator on the far left. Before I turn this session over to Robin, let's hit a couple of logistics. This is session 2 of our two-part conversation about project management. Part 1, debunking common project management myths and outlining the basic principles of project management, including Robin's definition of project management, the discipline of planning, organizing, securing, managing, leading, and controlling resources, and her summation of the 5 phases of project management: initiation, planning, execution, command and control, and finally closeout. With the 52 individual processes those involved, it is available as a recording on Innovative's YouTube channel, and if you attended session 1, was sent to you in an email last week. And just in case you didn't attend session 1, the link will also be included in this week's post-session email. Part 2 then, today, begins with getting started with project management in your library and continues into how to set a foundation for the future at your library. And as always, Part 2 will be supplied as a recording and slides to all who've registered for this week by the end of the week in your email, on our YouTube channel, and soon on our new landing page at III.com. And as with last week, we're hoping to have a great conversation with you all over the course of these next 2 hours. So please don't forget to chat your thoughts, questions, and answers to Robin's inquiries to all presenters, which will hit all 3 of us if you click all presenters in the send to line, in your chat box, and Ann and I will bring them into the conversation. In fact, let's do a quick test just to make sure that chat's working for you all today. So if you haven't already, as a practice chat, please pass us a question or a note topic in chat that you want to make sure we cover today. While we're waiting, I do see that we've had a few sign in and some notes. I have a note that Martha has signed in from, I hope I pronounced it right, Napahe, Indiana. Ann, do you have any others?
Ann is learning the logistics of unmuting her phone. But yeah, I have some, I have Linda, but Linda didn't say exactly where she was from. But hi, Linda, welcome to today's hot topic. And I also have Lois, who's interested in evaluation topics that might come up. And I think, Lois, you will leave with that question answered. But so far, that's it for me. Oh, I'm sorry, there's someone from, Linda's from Indiana. Thank you, Linda, for letting us know. Oh, there's been a lot of questions. This is great, guys. Lucretia is interested, Robin, in project management processes and how they integrate with equity measures. I hope I phrased that right, Lucretia. And if you don't hear that topic addressed, please let me know. Because we're also hearing things that people want workflow models for project management. Hi, Lydia from Thousand Oaks. She checked in with us on that. So we're getting a combination of people checking in from their locations as well as from their questions. And I'm trying to read this here. Oh, okay. So we have Athena, I believe, from the University of Central Florida has checked in. So once again, our census is very full. We seem to have crisscrossed the country. And so we do appreciate everyone joining us in whatever your time zone may be. And
all right. And Robin, I see a note that someone hopes that you're going to hit delegation as well.
Yep, I saw that too. So it's on my list.
All right. So then just one final thought before I turn the session over to Robin for the day.
Sorry.
I have a slide delay. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So in session 1, we noted that Innovative is investing in this Hot Topic series because we acknowledge that we're all in this together. and that it's a bit scary and risky with lots of new stuff going on. And finally, that we all needed a helping hand, and so much the better if it's an affordable or, as is the case of the hot topics, a free helping hand. But just what is it we're all in together that requires this collaboration and cooperation between and across systems, services, the library platform, vendors and customers alike, across the knowledge lifecycle, inside and outside of library? And just what is it that project management provides a responsible foundation for? For this answer, I want to borrow some words from Innovative's new SVP, Senior Vice President of Product Strategy, Catherine Harnish, from the executive update that she gave at AIUG last week. Robert, if you, yeah, there we go. And she said that the changes that are occurring in technology, in research, in teaching and learning have created a very different context for the missions of academic and research libraries, which is this quote, but also, of course, for public libraries as well. And that the evolving context affords us a moment of opportunity if we respond to the change in proactive and visionary ways. Because there are many diverse and unmet needs arising within our constituencies, and many of them closely align with the traditional South definitions of librarianship in academic research and public libraries. And to the extent that libraries and their leaders reposition themselves and their libraries to serve these evolving needs, libraries will emerge as even more central and vibrant resources for their institutions and the communities we serve. And if you click twice, so we have, this comes from the Changing Roles of Academic and Research Libraries that ACRL published in 2007, but it's relevant today, moving forward. But I'll leave the full explanation of this in more detail to Catherine, and I hope that you'll join her this Thursday, November 17th, for an hour as she walks you through her vision in her Follow the Leader, Innovative in the Future of Libraries webinar. You can register today at III.com, events and webinars at the top of the page, and it will be included in your email from this session as well. So without further ado, Robin, I'll turn the session over to you.
All right, thank you. Go back. This is Project Management Basics Session 2. I did add some new things that I'll talk about this week from last week's questions and comments that came up. So unfortunately, we don't have a Session 3, so hopefully I will be able to cover what you guys have already talked about while I'm doing my session today. But please, if I don't hit your questions, send them in again. I try to jot down everything I could there. So I am a 17-year veteran of public libraries. I've worked in a public library for 14 years and have been here as a consultant at Nichols for 5. My focuses that I tend to present on are public libraries, project management, cloud computing, technology in general. I was a technology librarian most of those 17 years. I've just been a general librarian for the last couple, so definitely have a tendency towards technology. And I've written a few books. I've got a 4th book coming out, I think, at the end of this year, beginning of next year at the latest. And then I've also written several articles on library technology topics, such as the one here, using GTD, getting things done, to get things done at your library. So if you're interested in following up on what's going on, what I've been talking about over the last few years, there's some resources for you. So for Session 2, Part 1, at the end of Session 1, I talked about maybe having a project in mind when you got here this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. I'll be asking about that later. If you did not already have something in mind, it can be a very small project, it can be a huge project, but just kind of have something in mind so that as we go through each of these processes that I'll be talking about today, you can relate it to something that you are already in the process of doing or are hoping to do in the future. If by some chance you just cannot think of a project at all that's coming up, I will share with you I teach this as a class through Library Juice Academy as well, and one of the students there sent in, she wasn't doing anything at this time that she considered a project, but she was rereading Robinson Crusoe. So she wanted to make the central theme of that book into her project, getting off the island and all that. And so it was probably one of the more entertaining project charters I've ever read. I really enjoyed it. So, you know, if you don't have anything, you can think of a book that you're reading. Maybe one of the characters can be recruited as your project. But anyway, that's just something to have in mind as we're going through this. So while you're thinking about that, a quick review, if you weren't able to catch last week's session yet, I went through and debunked, mostly, 10 myths of project management. We talked about the vocabulary, which uses standard English in non-standard ways. All of the words we talked about last week were English. They just are used in very specific ways in project management that are not necessarily common. Project management is not just for really big projects. For the getting things done, time management methodology talks about anything that takes 2 steps is a project. So looking up a phone number, making a phone call, that's a project. The official definition requires 50 hours, but even with that, that's still not necessarily a really huge project. You do not have to have a certification in project management. You can get your PMP, which is Project Management Professional certification, but it is not terribly easy. It's not terribly cheap. And unless you're planning on making this project management your life career, then it's not really required. Project management does involve more than just paperwork. Patrons and people in general do not know exactly what can be done in a project, and they're not real good at communicating and thinking big picture. So this is where project managers need to have some skills there. Failure is not always bad. It is something that you can learn from, and if you fail quickly and cheaply, can be useful, as a matter of fact. Planning is incredibly productive and never a waste of time, although I also gave a kind of a rule of thumb, 10% of the project time should be spent in planning. That keeps you from spending all of your time planning and none of your time doing, and gives you enough planning time to make sure you get a chance to think about the entire project. Estimating is an art as well as a science, and we talked about some tips on how to estimate money, time, and staff resources. Contingencies absolutely are necessary in both schedules and budgets, keeping in mind that things can and will go wrong. Murphy's Law is a law for a reason. Having a little wiggle room can be very, very helpful. And the final myth that I talked about is that project management methods, while best practices and while they will help any project become more successful, they do not guarantee success. They just make it a little more likely. So one of the things that we talked about last week that I mentioned that I got some questions about was feasibility. This is something that you do in the first phase of project management, your initiation phase, and this is kind of a thought, a way to think through and decide whether or not the project is even doable. If you go through and decide that you don't have the people or the money or the time to do the project, and starting it is guaranteed not going to be successful, then not doing the project can be as big a success as doing the project properly. So knowing whether or not feasibility is possible, whether everything is feasible that you want to do is a real important part of project management. So I mentioned feasibility studies, but I think as I said last week, feasibility in general, doing a feasibility study is kind of out of scope for this workshop. But I did want to give you some resources for further reading up on how to do feasibility studies in your projects. And some of the required bits of a feasibility study, just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. Description of the project, knowing what it is exactly that you want to do is important. Having an environmental scan, kind of an explanation of where you are now so that you know how far you need to go to get to success in your project. Operating requirements, those are technical needs, staffing needs, et cetera, as well as financial needs. And then a results report, which includes an escape route, a way to say, you know, this project isn't going to work because, and so instead of doing this project, either smaller, less resource-intensive project, a different kind of project, you know, something that maybe gives your sponsors and your stakeholders a way to say, okay, well, we'll step back from this right now, but we'll maybe look at it again later. So that's feasibility studies. Hopefully those resources will be helpful for you guys. So we talked about last week PM principles, project management principles, the fact that it is just a set of best practices that have been codified and put into a methodology for doing work. Project managers spend most of their time communicating. It's one of the major points of the job, one of the major duties that project managers have to do. So communication is vital, and knowing how to communicate and when to communicate is vital. And project managers are not only managing work, but they're managing people, they're managing meetings, they're managing all kinds of other different things that don't seem to have a direct correlation in project management. Meeting management is not really something that most people worry about when they're project managers, but it is vitally important that your meetings be useful. We'll talk more about that this week. And managing people, being able to manage human beings so that the work gets done is important. And unless you're doing all single-person projects where you're the only person working, it's kind of a necessity for getting your projects done on time, on budget, with your resources. So the PM styles, I talked a little bit about this last week. We talked about the traditional project management style. If you get just a PMP, that's going to be in the traditional project management, and it's considered a waterfall, which means there's very little backtracking. You go from one phase to the next without reiterating back to a former phase, just like water falls from one waterfall to another without ever going back. So that's the traditional style of project management. We talked a bit about agile project management, and again, that's another thing that I got some questions for. So here in just a second, I'll give you some more resources for agile project management. It's a fairly new, like within 5-7 years, part of project management. There's now a test you can take that gives you the Agile PMP. Agile project management, like I said, I'll talk more about it in the next slide, but I just wanted to show that it's a traditional, or it's a official, not traditional, it's an official project management format. There are tests, there are books, there are all kinds of resources for doing things instead of planning everything out and then going to the next phase and the next phase, you do things in 2-week sprints where you do kind of all 5 phases sort of in 2 weeks and then start over again. And the idea from the software development world is that you have working software at the end of every 2 weeks. You just keep adding more to it. And things move fast, so standing meetings, that kind of thing. One that I don't think I mentioned last week, but is a style of project management is the Prince 2. And it seems to be fairly similar to traditional American management, waterfall format and all that, but it's more popular in Europe. And so if you hear about Prince2 project management, you can be aware that you're probably talking to someone in Europe as opposed to in the U.S. I promised some further resources for Agile project management, and I'm guessing that these links will all be in your follow-up email. So you can see what go through these resources and take a look at them yourself. But Agile project management focuses on continuous improvement. When I was talking last week about how it's important to put a border around your project and make it, the scope is this, and this is all the resources you have, and so you need to protect that scope. Agile project management is a little more flexible on scope because things can move around a little bit more than in the traditional format. And so you've got some scope flexibility. There's team input throughout the process. While you should actually be trying to get team input throughout the entire planning process and then as reporting back in traditional project management, this includes the team in every process and every kind of format. One thing that you'll see, and that one of the resources here is Agile project management with Scrum. One of the things you'll see a lot is Scrum as a project management framework, and it allows for flexibility and collaboration. It kind of lays out just how you do your project management. It's very similar to the 5 phases and 42 processes and all that, but it's much less prescriptive. It just sets just enough of a structure for teams to focus on what they need. So I just wanted to be, Scrum is kind of it's a weird kind of concept and not one that you come across in traditional project management at all. So I wanted to point that out as a possible thing you'll run into. So last week I said come prepared with a basic project in mind. Does anybody want to share with the group what kind of project you have in mind? If you do, make use of the chat room. And have we gotten much through the chat room while I've been chatting here?
We have not, but I think that's about to change, Robin. So we're going to sit back and wait. I think everyone did their homework, or they have some project in mind, simply because of what they put in the chat about topics that they wanted to see covered.
Sure.
Yeah. Nanette, I don't have anything. What about on your side?
I have one, and Robin, it's a short one. So it's a smaller project, but it's to implement audience-specific notices and emails to our constituency. So things about coming of age, new offerings in your area, but just to increase engagement based on what you've shared with us and what we have added to our collection.
Okay, that's very cool. So basically what you're going to need, your justification for doing the project is clearly to provide information and the kind of point of need and the people who need it the most. You've got a goal, what you can come up with, hopefully, through the project management process is kind of an idea of how much time it's going to take to implement this new service, an idea of the staff needed, and money required. I'm interested to know if that might be something that is a commercial service or if it's something that you guys are doing kind of a homegrown thing.
Yep. Well, yep. I'm sorry, Nanette. We're bumping heads here because chat has been lit up. But go ahead, please.
I will let you go ahead, Ann.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Lydia wrote in when we were talking about projects, and she said that at her library they started a discussion of, and she put in quotes, a classics section geared toward high schoolers and their college reading list.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I like that idea. Kind of putting it off to the side, or together, so that they know where to go. And that would be a reasonably small project, but something you could still go through, and you've got a goal, you've got a set amount of time, how you want to use your staff, because you'll have research, you'll have to know what kind of reading lists are being sent out for the next year at the college. So there's, I can think of your work breakdown structure being pulled together already. So that's a good project
right.
as well.
There was a similarly reported one where one library has reported that they are changing their nonfiction books to a Dewey list system, totally doing away with the classification of the nonfiction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's something that other people have done, and if other people have done it and done that documentation at the end of the project where they have kind of a lessons learned and a closeout document that talks about what they did and how they did it, that would be really, really handy. And librarians are sharing kind of people. I bet you, if somebody actually did a formal project documentation on a project like that, I bet you could share it. If, however, no one has done a formal project management process with this kind of thing, you could be the first, and you could be the ones who are the go-to folks for that. So that would be quite interesting, and I hope you manage to kind of keep track of as you're going and all the lessons that you're learning as you go along, so that if there is no one who has a final documentation of a project like that, then you can be the ones to take credit for that.
Yes,
Robin, this is Nanette. I know in that, because I'm a metadata geek, I know in that Dewey list system that actually at both ALA and IFLA over the last couple of years, while we didn't see the project outputs, in the Dewey forums, what we did see was the evidence that their completed projects produced for how it changed, who was coming into the library. We did see how they underestimated costs. So some of those factors. So where in the project management process, if I don't have like the total outputs from my last phase, but I just have these research findings, maybe even coming out of MLAS education, how do I work that into my project plan, or where?
Those would be real handy in the project planning, because you would take that information, and when you're talking about, we're going to talk a lot about risks and thinking of different risks. That's going to, like you said, it costs more. Those are risks that other people had hit and might be a problem for you as well. So that would definitely be a really useful thing to have when you're going through your project planning, coming up with your project plan, so that you know what problems they encountered, and you can kind of mitigate them on yours. You can make all new mistakes, because that's pretty much how it should work, right?
I never have a problem with that.
Yeah. All right. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and talk about, this is kind of the parts and pieces of project management. What I've done, I put together a Dropbox folder of project management resources. So everything that I'm going to talk about today is there. There's some template or something there. So last week I talked about what you need to do. This week I'm going to be a little more specific on how you do certain things. We'll talk about how you make use of some of these templates. And the Kermit flail, actually I use that in some of my, I didn't in this particular presentation, but I've used that in some of my presentations to describe a world without project management, when you're flailing about It's much more fun when it's actually running, when the GIF is flailing about. But that's non-project management work is a lot of flailing, at least for me it has been. All right, so we're going to start with phase one, the initiation. We talked a little bit about having the feasibility studies. I did put a feasibility study template in that Dropbox, so you've got access to that. There are also initiation templates, checklist templates. Those you can go through and just kind of check off everything that you need to do in the phase one phase, basically. So that checklist is there. It gives you some things, objectives, goals for the project. Make sure you've got those. It makes sure you have identified your sponsors and your stakeholders. It makes sure that you have thought about a final authority for the project, your business requirements, whether or not, and this is part of your feasibility study, if the business requirements if the project gives your organization what it needs. In the business world, those are business requirements. For us, is it going to fulfill a service or to help us help others, basically. And then you'll talk about, also in the checklist template, it'll talk about what deliverables you might need. This is where you can kind of start thinking about the outputs of your project. Risk assessment, if you've done that already, or if you've gathered maybe, as Nanette mentioned, examples from earlier projects that have reported on what kind of risks they ran into. You've got kind of the scope of the project sketched out. The checklist will help you with that, thinking about that, as well as budgets and dependencies, or budgets and deadlines, and all of your various constraints sketched out as well. Do you have dependencies within and without the project? That's not just, I talked about dependencies last week as being, something that has to be done before something else can start. There's also projects, outside the project, you'll have dependencies. People will have their regular day job. There's, operational things that need to get done without, considering the project. So are you thinking about that? Are you giving people enough time to work on both their day-to-day jobs and their projects? So rough idea of start and end dates, hours, budgets, the functionality of the final product. It kind of gives you a chance to think about whether or not you've really considered that. So the output of phase one is the charter, and that's going to formally authorize the manager. It's going to set the scope of the project. It's going to give a goal for the project, whatever goal that your project has come up with that satisfies your business need. It's going to have at least the deliverables at the end of the project. Maybe not you might not have to consider all of them throughout the project, but at least at the end of the project. A summary of milestones, places where you want to check and make sure that you're on track, and then a preliminary budget, a very, very preliminary idea of how much things are going to cost. So that output, your charter from phase one, becomes the input for phase two. And what we've got here is a table of contents of a project management plan. It's a little more detailed than what maybe every project needs. There are a lot of things that maybe aren't necessary for smaller projects. Some of the ones that we talked about already today, creating a classics section in your library, for example, probably doesn't need a huge amount of risk thinking, doesn't need any staffing. Once you've got it, somebody to maybe do the initial work, it doesn't need a whole lot of upkeep, so you don't need a whole lot of staff. These are just, things that you might not need to consider for smaller projects. But for the entire project, this is the table of contents for a project plan that covers everything, every kind of planning you need. What I think is necessary in a fully fledged project plan is a scope. That is your justification for maybe having a scope. This is not justification for the project. This is justification why you're putting limits. Maybe you have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of staff, a limited amount of money. Whatever your constraints are, these are justification for putting your border around your project, saying this is no farther will I go. This is it. So in your scope, you limit your product, your deliverables. You limit what it is you're going to produce in general. You have an objective for the project that often comes out of your scope. And then assumptions and limitations. These are constraints, again. They're things that you assume that things are going to go this way. And the more you can consider those assumptions, the more you can kind of make sure that they either happen or don't, depending on whether what you need. But these are assumptions like you are assuming everybody's going to stay in their position and you're not going to have any job vacancies for the next 6 months. And that's going to, that'll affect the scope. If somebody leaves, then your scope is kind of, maybe you have to narrow it a little, or you have to adjust something else. But anyway, those are all the kinds of things that you'll put into a scope statement, a full scope statement. The scope change documentation, there is again, example of that in the templates in that Dropbox folder. The scope change document, what you're asking someone to do when they say, hey, I know you just need to add maybe in that classics section, instead of just hitting all of the public universities and getting their freshman books, maybe we should hit all of the private universities as well. That's a fairly large scope change. If what you've decided to do is start out by just getting reading lists from your public universities in your state, including private universities can make a lot more work, quite frankly. So what you're going to do is you're going to hand off your change document to this person who is requesting the change, and they are going to have to describe what they want as a change, adding private universities to the list. They're going to have to give you the benefit. It will make it a little bit more useful because people who are going to different colleges other than your state colleges will find value in it. The implications of not making the change, well, kids who go to private universities might not be able to just go and grab their book real easily. An impact analysis of the change. So how is this going to affect the work that's being done? If you have to add not only getting reading lists from public, but also from private universities, how does that impact the work that needs to be done? Are there alternatives? Could perhaps you just have a document that has reading lists for private universities, but you don't necessarily collect those materials? And then a final resolution. What the final resolution is what you as the project manager decide. You look at the information that this person has filled out in the change description, the benefits, maybe implications of not making a change. You consider whether their impact analysis is correct. If a lot of times they don't really understand what kind of work is going to be required, so you may have to partially fill that out. Alternatives and final resolution, those are going to be things that maybe you can fill out on as you're finishing off. If the decision, the change that needs to be made, you don't think it's going to make a huge impact, you think it can be done within the scope, the constraints of time, money, and staff that you have, your final resolution may be to add that change to your project, and that's fine. That's a perfectly acceptable result, but it is something that you'll have justification for, documentation for why you added it in, why you think it will be acceptable. Or if you decide that it's not going to be something that you can do in this one, you can maybe say, okay, well, maybe next year we can expand the project and get some more resources and add this in. Either way, you've got the documentation of what needs to be done. I talked a little bit about the work breakdown structure last week. This is basically where you go through and you break down the work that needs to be done in not tiny little to-do bits, but 8-hour or better activities packages. And so each of these things, like the prime mission product and the platform integration, those are going to be at least 8 hours. And since they're kind of higher level, they might be more like a week. With the smaller, the application software and the system software and the subsystem, those being maybe the 8-hour packages. Because we all think differently and our brains work a little differently, the template that I've given you has both the chart and a worksheet. Some people do not think in boxes and in hierarchical charts. They would prefer to lay things out in a spreadsheet-like manner, and so you have both in that. And that's just kind of a way to help you go through the process of breaking down what work needs to be done in whichever fashion you find easiest. This next process is the Gantt chart. That's the scheduling. And this is kind of an example Gantt chart. The right side column is a list of all of the activities from your work breakdown structure. So once you've got your work breakdown structure done, you can put those activities in here into your Gantt chart maker, and there are a billion out there. So you can find them, everything from Excel templates to fully fledged software programs that do nothing but make Gantt charts. But what you have here is your tasks on the right side, and then a schedule, your calendar on the top, and your resources. And in this case, it's the Mike Smith, Jennifer Jones, Sam Watson are your human resources. So each of them are assigned to a task that lasts a particular amount of time. And we talked a little bit about those milestones. Those are indicated by your little square, diamond, square on the side, your little diamond things here. And dependencies are indicated by these arrows. So you've got to have this done before you can start that kind of thing. There's not a whole lot of, this is all very dependency. There's not a whole lot of overlap here, but that's the way they've laid out this project. There is, however, a second way that you might find to lay out a project. That's your Pert chart. This, I'm going to admit to you now, is not one that I use. I'm a Gantt chart fan, but for people who are more mathematically inclined, perhaps, who think a little differently, this program evaluation review technique comes from the Navy, and it is basically the same information as that Gantt chart we just saw, just laid out differently. So instead of having your tasks as a row down the side, they're your numbered rectangles. Those are events, tasks, milestones, however you want to, they don't really lay out milestones here. In this Pert chart, your directional arrows are the dependent tasks that have to be done sequentially. So from 2 to 4 is a dependent task. However, 1 to 2 and 3 can be done at the same time. So those are concurrent tasks. And then dotted lines, like that dummy activity over there between 6 and 9, are dependent tasks that don't require resources. Honestly, there are very few tasks that don't require some kind of resource. So you may be thinking of different resources than I am. But basically, this is just another way of laying out a project path. Whether through the Gantt chart we said we had in the last one or the Pert chart. The best way to start these, and either the Pert or the Gantt chart, is to lay out your critical path of your project, and that's going to be the absolute minimum amount of time it takes to do the absolute required tasks for your project. That's going to be your critical path. And then you'll want to, pad a little here and there for those contingencies and the risks that we talked about. But both your Gantt chart and your Pert chart should start with an understanding of what the critical path through the project is, and then you can move on from there. So we're still in planning. Remember, of the 42 processes that are included in project management, 20 of them are in the planning phase. So we're still working through our planning phase here. And I wanted to talk about, besides the scope information, the work breakdown structure, the scheduling, either Gantt or Pert, risk assessment and risk consideration is also something that I think is kind of a necessity for most projects. I can't think of many projects that shouldn't at least think a little bit about this. And even if it's just somebody's sick and you have to either pull someone else in to do the work or take more time because that person's not there. That's a basic, simple risk that almost every project has, but your projects will have different risks. So your risk assessment form, in that document on the templates, you're going to talk about, for each problem area or activity, you're going to think about risks. And when you've identified them, you'll give a description, the probability of occurrence, and the impact intensity. These are kind of things I talked about last week, where I talked about the analysis of different risks. Some risks are very possible, but not very impactful. Other risks are hugely impactful, but not totally probable. So you're going to weigh the risk of a tornado. It's going to make a huge impact on your project, quite possibly flattening your building, but the chances of it happening are not maybe as probable as somebody getting sick and being out for a week and a half. So what you're going to do in this assessment form is you're going to talk about what measures you have to mitigate the risk already, what measures the strategy you'll make to improve mitigation, things that you want to do additionally, and then a contingency plan. If everything on this risk assessment happens, what are you going to do? One thing before we move on, kind of a pause in the planning process, I want to talk about brainstorming. Do any of you have brainstorming tips and tricks, other than I've got some here and I will go over, but this is probably a good time once I finish with this slide to talk about what you guys think is important in brainstorming, because my tips are basically these. Everyone should be prepared. If there is homework that needs to be done, things that need to be read, everyone needs to be prepared before they come into the building or into the room where the brainstorming is happening, so that everybody has at least a baseline of understanding of what's going on. There should be an expectation for full participation. Everybody who's invited should speak up at some point. Facilitators should be active in making sure that participation happens. And just kind of as a side note to that, 5 to 10 participants is usually the kind of goal there for how many people you have going. You want enough that as people are yelling out ideas, it triggers in other people's heads new ideas, but you don't want so many that somebody can get away with sitting quietly and not participating and just kind of not being helpful. So 5 to 10 is a generally accepted limit on the number of participants you need. The person recording the ideas should be a non-participant. They should be either the facilitator or a non-idea generating participant. And the best way to do it is on a large format, either on paper, taped to the wall, one of those big pads that you can write things down on the screen, somebody typing in ideas as they come in, however you want to do it, but the ideas should be recorded in a way where everybody can see each idea as it's being written. And finally, no judging. There should be no judging of ideas. The crazier, the better. When you're done with the brainstorming and you are kind of assessing what the ideas are, that's when you do the judging. But during the brainstorming, any judging will pretty much almost immediately stop the flow of ideas. People, once they realize they're being judged, are much less likely to be forthcoming with their ideas. In no judgment zone, however, folks will throw things out. And you'll get more and better ideas. You'll get different risks, things that maybe people didn't think of, if you're doing this as a risk assessment activity or something like that. So, Anne, have there been any, sorry, I had to mute myself, have there been any other brainstorming tips suggested?
Yeah, actually, Robin, there have been. Trevor has put through the chat that he uses one of my favorite resources, which is those big, giant sticky notes. And they are pasted all around the room as the brainstorming sessions take place. So there, you mentioned making certain that everyone can see the form. You know, you have the large formatted pad there, and those giant sticky notes are wonderful for that. And so, Trevor, I've actually used those before myself, and I think they're wonderful. I wish all of the pads were like that. So let's see. Don't see anything else coming through on this end just yet, but someone else, I'm sure, has brainstorming techniques that they might want to share with us. And so chat is open to receive those suggestions.
I've used those sticky pads too, and they are really handy. The last time I used them, we had split up into groups where we talked about issues with our ILS. And then came back, you know, circulation had their group and acquisitions had their group, and we came back and talked, and everybody had put their ideas and their issues on one of those pads, and then we just kind of posted them up around the wall, and we can have a conversation while surrounded by people's ideas, and that is amazingly useful. So I agree with Trevor there. Those sticky pads are awesome.
Yes, they are. And that was a wonderful use of them. And we've had some in breakout sessions where, like, as you said, each group comes in, and then it's always interesting to see that there are always common elements on all of the different breakouts, but then each group has addressed their own. So, yes. And so another, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on, took them off to clean them in between talking here. But someone has pointed out in chat that it's also important when you're in these brainstorming sessions to take into account that some of your participants might not be comfortable talking in big groups. So having them submit their ideas or suggestions in writing is also a consideration, particularly if you have no control over the size of your group. You know, Robin, you've recommended that they stick to groups between 5 and 10. But sometimes when you're in these sessions, you may not having a choice on how many you have available. And so that's a very good technique to keep in mind. It says, apologies for not being able to see who submitted that.
That's an absolutely excellent point. Not always do you get the chance to set your own time or your own size. That is true. And that facilitating actively for full participation, handing out pads at the beginning, little notepads where people can write things down and hand them in if they don't want to yell out. Because you're right, some people just are never going to be the kind of person who's comfortable yelling out their ideas in a big group. The bigger the group, the more people you'll find like that. So that's a really good idea, is handing out, giving them some way to write down ideas and hand them in, and then have the facilitator or the non-participant recorder write them down in a way that maybe, not, you hand the paper to them and then they immediately write it down. They collect it for 3 or 4 people and then start writing it down. So it's not, again, it's not implicating someone in a particular idea, which may be part of their
Exactly. Yeah, we had some good things come through in chat on brainstorming risk there, and I'm sure all of us at one time or the other have actually been in these situations. So I think we have some good takeaways on what we can take to our next brainstorming session.
Oh, good. And, this is one of those things that's not really a project management topic. It's not, there's no process that is labeled brainstorming, but it is a really useful tool and technique for many of the processes, and especially in planning, which is why I wanted to throw this out here. So, okay. So, continuing with the planning, there are the last really required thing, and again, this is not required for all projects. Some projects have no budget, and they just don't require any money, and that's fine. But most projects will have some, at least small budget, and so during the planning phase, you're going to decide whether you are going to budget by project task or by the source of the cost. Where you're getting whether it's a staffing, whether the cost is in staffing, whether it's in procurement, whether it's in supplies, the different things that you need. And there are templates for each kind of budgeting in the document or in the Dropbox that I've given you. So you can budget by project task, where you're, kind of based on your work breakdown structure, or by source of cost. And however you guys like to think of it, you've got a template there. Most libraries have budget processes in place already, so you'll probably use those for your project, and if it's neither by task nor by cost, then by all means use whatever budgeting process you have already in place. I have no templates in my handy Dropbox folder on procurement, no purchase orders or anything like that, because most libraries already have procurement processes in place, and every library is different. No two libraries seem to be the same in how they procure supplies or manage money. So don't look for a lot of information about procurement processes in the templates that I'm getting. So this is, and let's see, this is where you're going to think of, kind of pull together the project planning and put it into numbers. So the next, no clicking. Okay, sorry. My computer's not wanting to work today. The next phase is execution. We've got initiation and planning done. We have, now all we have to do is doing the work. So in phase 3, your processes that you're going to be hitting is doing the work, actually performing the duties that need to be done to pull the classics that the college needs, or you know, decide on a way to present your dewey list nonfiction. You know, the work that needs to be done to make the project happen happens here. You're also, however, going to be making sure that the work is up to par. This is kind of a quality measurement, quality assurance. This is also something you'll be doing in the next phase, which kind of happens at the same time, but you also need to make sure it's happening throughout the project. So this is where you're also going to be spending some time managing your teams, meetings, making sure that things are moving along and that people are communicating properly. So like I said, communication is a huge part of what's going on. And this is also where you're going to be working on managing expectations. A big part of the project manager's job is to make sure everyone understands what is expected from the project. And this is where you're making sure that both the people, the stakeholders and the sponsors understand the expectations that you have of the project. They have the same ones. And you're also making sure that your team is working towards those expectations. And then finally, in execute, what you do is also procure your resources that you need to make the project happen. Phase 4, command and control. Like I said, this kind of happens when along the same time as phase 3. You can think of it as happening kind of above the execution of the project. So here, your big job here is to keep track of what's going on and make sure that scope creep isn't happening, that new little features and things that are naturally people want to add aren't making your project unwieldy. So your status reporting happens here in the command and control. You should, as part of your planning phase, have decided what kind of, the communication plan, decided what kind of communication and what kind of status reporting you'll be doing, who you'll be doing it to, that kind of thing. This is where you check and make sure that things that you've never even thought of during your risk identification brainstorming are not happening, as well as checking to make sure that risks that you did identify are not happening, documenting them, and not only documenting the issues that are arising because of those risks, but how you're taking care of them, what steps you're taking to make them less of a problem. Let's put it that way. So here you're also keeping track of your budget and monies that are spent and available. This is also where you keep track of schedules and human resources. So you know who's working on what, where they are in their job. You're checking milestones to make sure that certain deliverables are happening when they're supposed to happen. And then you're just kind of keeping track of things. And again, there's not a whole lot of templates in this phase, although there are status reports. Those scope change forms are useful here too. While the project, it's not just something that happens, scope creep does not just happen during planning. It actually tends to happen during execution and command and controlling more often, because you're actually doing the work and people are like, oh, hey, why don't we just add this one little thing? It won't be a big deal. It might be a big deal. You don't know until you've thought about it. So this is where the scope change form, the status reports, maybe, and your risk identification is going to happen. You'll want to report that in your status reporting. So, but the keeping track of schedule and budget, you've already created those. You've already created your budget. You've already created your Gantt chart. You're just now using them to manage your project. And finally, for the final phase, we have closeout. And this is an important step. Like I mentioned earlier with the Dewey-less nonfiction project. I know other libraries have done it. I've seen the reports, and as Nanette said, I've heard about the projects at conferences. I have not actually, however, seen anyone post this is what we learned while we did, and a specific project management kind of style. So if this is what your project is doing, I would be very interested in seeing that lessons learned document. And there is a template, of course, in the Dropbox there, so you're good to go there. And then you fill out that lessons learned template, and again, you're going to use those project status reports to help you with that, because they're going to remind you of the issues that you ran into and how you fixed them, and so you can kind of figure, well, this is something that happened, and this is all that is. You remember that because your status reports reported on it at some point during the project. You finalize the budget procedures, as your library does. Close out any invoices, finish your procurement, however you do that. And then after all of your sign-offs on the project are collected, you have a party. This could be a small little thank you and here's a cupcake. It could be a big blowout at a place of refreshment. It just basically needs to be a thank you for the team members, the people who have worked on this with you. If you are working on a project by yourself, if you are the single project manager and worker and dishwasher, do something nice for yourself, by yourself, that little jewelry or book or whatever it is that you've been wanting. Take yourself out to lunch. Do something that that gives you a little closure for the project, and you can say, okay, we're done with that. It's time to move on to the next one, right? So success. You've gone through all 5 of your phases. You've finished everything up. Was it a successful project? That's pretty much something that you should have considered in phase 1. But what you're looking for here is your sponsor or your head stakeholder, the person who paid for the project, who asked you to do the project, were their objectives met? And really the only way you can be sure of that is if you documented them in your project initiation phase. Was there a satisfactory completion of project processes? Was everything done on time, within budget? Were quality standards met? This is stuff that you should be documenting during your command and control phase, during the status reports. Was there general satisfaction with the project's output and deliverable? That is, you find that out by getting sign-offs. Your stakeholders have signed off on the project saying it is acceptable and we're taking it. So all of those things, and that again, the sign-offs, you know, they signed off on the charter giving you the authority to do the project. Maybe they should sign off on the lessons learned document. I believe there are sign-off lines on the template that I've got there. But basically, they acknowledge that they have accepted the work. But what you need to do is, in phase 1, be thinking, as you're going through all of these, there are moments in each of these phases where success, what does success look like? That should be defined in phase 1 and then continued on through the entire project. So one of the things we talked about last week as well was rescuing a project that is failing. And again, I found some resources on refocusing and rescuing your project. I also found a Dilbert comic strip. Sorry, I had a moment if I couldn't think of the word comic. So cartoon, I think, is where I was going with that. But anyway, the math clearly shows that our project won't work even if we do everything right, Dilbert says. Well, it's embarrassing to cancel in the middle of a project. We can't do it. So should I stop buying stuff, Dilbert asks? And boss says, no, you should buy twice as much, because that's what a lot of people do. They double down, and they figure that they have spent so much money already, and so they don't want to admit that the project might not be salvageable, and so they try throwing everything at it. There are times to do that, and there are times to cut your losses and call it quits. And some of these resources will give you some guidance on when to do that. One of the things that I really liked when I was reading through this is the concept of re-baselining your project. You're going to have to go back to phase 2 at the very least and give yourself a new schedule, perhaps a new budget. If your project's failing, you're just going to have to go back and reset up all of your baseline requirements. And so if you decide to continue on, however, like I said, it's entirely possible that the project is unrescuable, and you need to know when that happens too. All right, so Anne, have there been any questions? And actually I know we talked a little bit about equality measures and equality measure integration. Does the person who asked that want to maybe expand on what exactly they mean with that?
Okay, yeah, so Lucretia's still with us, and so hopefully she can. But yeah, chat was pretty busy during that phase, Robin. We had a couple of things come in when you were talking about library procurement, and it was pointed out that Marshall Breeding has some very good resources that we might find useful, and of course all of us know who he is. And so that's another tip we can pass along. But then it's also amusing how many of us can identify with the Dilbert comic in that regard. So, and someone who had attended last week's session pointed out, because if you remember when you were going over the debunking the 10 myths, we talked about failing. And so when they reiterated that sometimes project failures can also be successes in other areas. So that's someone who's connecting the two hot topics together, which we, of course, love, that people are picking up on content from one and bringing it over into our next session with that regard. So I haven't seen anything so far from Lucretia, who had originally posted that question early on. But I do want to point out, because we may have others that came through in the first part, because we did have something on evaluation that I think you have covered. And so if you posted a question before the session started and you feel that you need some additional information, because I think, Robin, you addressed pretty much everything that had come through earlier. But
I think yeah, I think evaluation, hopefully the success, having that, knowing what success is helps with evaluation, certainly. And then there was a couple of the workflow models. Hopefully the templates that I'm providing will give you that workflow through the project, and maybe my going back through the project phase 1 through 5 was helpful there, but if it wasn't, or if you had more specific questions, please do. I didn't go much into delegation. That's your Gantt chart is really where you're going to do most of your who does what stuff, but that's really, the Gantt chart is the process the product, of your delegation. Knowing your team and knowing who can do what and trusting that they can do it is a big part of delegation, and so being able to take your team and figure out who's going to do what and when it's going to be done, and doing all that. The Gantt chart basically is your I can say is a product of delegation, and delegation is something that you just kind of have to practice if you're not very good at it. A lot of us aren't when we first start being in a position where we're handing out work. I know many of us, myself included, tend to be, if I'm going to be responsible for work being done, I want it done right. And of course, I'm the only person who can do that right? Wrong. No. That's something that we all have to learn. You're not the only person who can do it right. Your way is not the only right way. And learning that and understanding that is a hard lesson sometimes. The only other thing that I want to say about the delegation is as your command and control phase is going on, this is where you're keeping an eye on what you have delegated. If it helps to give that information or that work out, to know that you are going to be keeping a real close eye on what's going on during the command and control phase, that may be a way that you can kind of take a deep breath and let go a little of the work. I'm going to talk a little bit in the next section on managing people, and we might go more into delegation there. But hopefully, with the exception of the equality measures, because I'm not 100% sure what the question was, how to frame that. Hopefully, I hit most of those things that we talked about at the beginning. So is there anything else?
No, just several others including Lee, who says she's actually living that Gilbert comic now. So I'm sure there's some interest. That sounds like some interesting things are happening at her library. But I think that's it from this end so far.
All right. Well, then we're going to go ahead and head into part 2, where we're going to talk about setting a foundation for the future, becoming more project management oriented. And the first thing I want to talk about is becoming a project-based organization. Libraries in general are functional-based organizations. I imagine most of you work in either a circulation department or a tech services department or a reference department. Those are all functional departments. Project-based organizations tend to blow through that, and you're no longer in a particular department. You're assigned to a project team. And so you've got the two extremes on each end, the functional-based organization and the project-based organization. And then in the middle is kind of a matrix organizational structure, and that's what a lot of us are finding ourselves kind of feeling our way toward. The matrix structure is kind of a resources are shared among the projects through the functional departments. So even though you may be a circulation manager, you are also going to be asked to work on projects that have maybe nothing to do with circulation specifically. You do still have a functional management line structure, but project teams are made up of people who cross those functional lines. And so that kind of splits your power and your authority between the functional supervisor and the project manager. So whereas in a functional-based organization that's maybe doing projects, you're maybe doing projects within a department, So your functional supervisor is going to be maybe a little higher than your project manager, or is the project manager. Matrix-based organization is more where they both share the same amount of authority. Going from a functional to either a matrix or a project organization is difficult, and there are pros and cons for each structure, for each of the three structures. So you need to decide if becoming a project-based organization is even feasible for a library. Honestly, I don't know of any libraries that are project-based organizations. I've seen some that at least are going to start with the matrix organization, where they pull people from multiple departments to do projects on a regular basis. So that is, those are all kind of the way people have started to structure organizations based around project management. So if you're moving into a culture that is more project management based than functionally based, you're going to think of things as projects rather than duties assigned to departments. So you're going to get, instead of the reference department having a new service or whatever, as a function of the reference department, you're going to have a project that adds a new service, and you're going to include marketing and technical services and, people who are going to be affected, but not necessarily all reference folks. And so that is one way to start developing a culture for project management. For you yourself, you can start using some of this project management vocabulary to get people thinking in project management terms as opposed to operational, everyday kind of work. Staff meetings should include project status reports and discussion on how projects are going, so that the whole staff knows about the projects that are going on. Build teams that are cross-departmental. Do some cross-training. That's just a good idea for a library in general, but for project management culture, it's really kind of it's just a great way to make sure that people understand what's going on throughout the library and are able to contribute, maybe in multiple ways. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about project management training in your library, continuing the process. But one of the things that you can do is offer those trainings through brown bag lunches, informal mentoring, however you want to do it. So these are some ideas for how to change the culture or start to get the culture to change in your library to be more project management related. That comes to the tools. One of the things that people have the hardest time with sometimes, not always, is getting people to use the same tool for projects. There's a million tools. I've listed a few here, but there are a million more, and at the bottom of the slide it says, what do you use? You guys can be typing that in while I'm talking about the ones I've got here. But the granddaddy of them all, the big one, is Microsoft Project, and it is a huge product. It has pretty much everything you'll need for budgeting and scheduling and planning and executing and doing all that. It has a nice hefty learning curve as well as a hefty price tag. Something that's just slightly less complicated and quite a bit cheaper is something called Dot Project. That is an open source software suite that provides all kinds of resources for project management. The catch there is that it is something that you need to have some server space and the know-how how to install web-based software. A lot of libraries do, but if you don't, that could be an issue. If you want to move away from that kind of thing, the home software that you install on your own network, either on your computers or on your server. Then we can move into something like Basecamp. This is a software company that's been around for a while, and they have, it's not free, but they have a solution that gives you lots of project management tools. Zoho Project is another one that's maybe a little cheaper, but the same general idea. And then we'll move into Asana, which integrates with Gantt. I think I mentioned it last week. You can take your tasks in Asana and they will automatically start filling out a Gantt chart with Gantt. So it's a little more, not a full project management suite like Dot Project or Basecamp or Zoho, but it's a tool that you can use. Trello is about the same, and that is a based on the Kanban time management system, which is one that it's interesting. It's not the way I think, so I don't use it very often. Like I said, I'm a getting things done kind of person, but it gives you boards, and you can arrange things by boards. Again, it's not a full project management suite that gives you everything you need, but it is a nice tool that you can use. And something that just came in is Amy said she was just at a conference and heard that the University of Notre Dame has a project-based organization within the library that serves the entire library. That's cool. I had not heard that. So it is starting to happen in the library world, it appears. And then an open source tool that she's heard is working well in libraries that might be closer to MS Project than Dot Project is Project Libra. And I'm assuming that's going to be kind of like LibreOffice, which is an open source alternative to Microsoft Office. So Project Libra, I don't know if I run across that. I will have to go download that and start playing with it. So thank you very much, Amy, for those suggestions. And Elizabeth also mentioned that they're working on project outcomes, which is also something that we're working on with our libraries. And project management training would fit right in with that. You are absolutely right. Project outcomes is a way that you can do the evaluation of programs or your strategic plan, or there's a bunch of different options, but it helps to libraries to come up with outcomes as opposed to just statistics, like you had 60 people come to a program, but what outcomes were as a result of that program. So it goes a little deeper into how your library's efforts affect your patrons. And project management, I mean, it would fit right in with that. You're absolutely right. So, Anne, were there any other suggestions for project management tools other than the ones that came into me?
Well, there was a couple, but those were both, sorry, both of those were for MS projects, which have, it's been around a while and a lot of people have been using. And some of the newer innovative implementations may have also been familiar with Basecamp, because Innovative uses that tool for our new implementations. But we also had an interesting note where their college has been using the Planner, and I'm not familiar with that, but they reported that it's part of the Office 365 subscription. And so while they are proficient MS project users, they're now looking at this Planner piece of Office 365, which I'm writing down and going to go and take a look at that, because we have the Office 365 subscription as well. But those were just
that is interesting. I don't know if I've run across that either. So,
I'm sorry?
I said, that is interesting. I don't know if I've run across that either, so I'm jotting it down as well.
Yeah.
So along with that and Project Libra,
Yep.
I will be trying out new project management tools.
Yep, most definitely. I wrote the Project Libra down when Amy first posted it to chat. So, yeah, those are, it's always good to learn new things and try new and exciting tools. And you've given us a lot to think about and lots of choices, depending on what you like.
Yeah, exactly. It is very much how you think and what you like. That's why there are so many options, because we don't all think exactly the same. So, all right. And somebody said Microsoft bought Trello and turned it into Planner. So I'm a little behind on the times I had not heard of that. So interesting.
Oh, wow, thank you. I wasn't aware of that either.
So I've been harping about communication and communication issues, and one of the best books I've ever read on communication is this one here, this Crucial Conversations, where it talks about how to communicate. And this is more for high stakes communication, you know, where you're talking about maybe a disciplinary action or something like that. But it also gives you a way to think about, a lot of us, again, and I think I'm going to say this over and over over the next few slides, our brains are different. We all think differently. And I know I have run across people where I am communicating in the way that I know how and I'm comfortable, and they're communicating in the way they know how and are comfortable, and we're talking across each other. Neither of us get the other person. And that requires stepping back and thinking about what's happening. And this book really does help with that. So I talked about meetings last time, a lot of what. Again, I'll talk about how here in a minute. Cross-departmental communication, are those lines open? If you're not a matrix organization yet, if you're very much functional still, are you opening up those lines of communication so that people can communicate and share information across departments while working on projects? I talked a little bit about delegating earlier, and actually delegating as the boss is something that, you know, that's what you do as a boss. You give people work to do. What's really, really difficult is delegating when you're not the boss. And that, I think last week, my major piece of advice for that was to become friends with all of your team members' bosses, so that you can go to them and talk about, you know, maybe how to delegate to this particular person, what works best, what they're good at, what they're need some skill building on, that kind of thing. So communication is really crucial here for all of this, for the meetings and talking about things cross-departmentally and assigning work. Communication and communication skills are vital, and again, Crucial Conversations is a great book for that kind of thing. So meetings, I mentioned. Some of our best practices, begin with purpose. Have a written agenda that you've sent out at least 24 hours in advance with rough times for each topic, 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever. I wouldn't consider those times to be absolute if it goes a little over, but you're giving people kind of an idea of how much discussion you expect for each agenda item when you do that. And so that gives them a chance to prepare. You should encourage open discussion. Again, we've talked about the fact that not everybody is comfortable talking in big groups, and sometimes you might need to work to get this information out of people. What you can do is ask if people want to maybe submit reports via email before the meeting, or you know, do things that don't require them to be talking so much in front of people. But you should also work on drawing them out a little bit and having as much discussion as possible, because open discussion always helps. So to press for closure, every time you get to the end of an agenda item, you should have an action item, something that is going to happen, and a person who is responsible for that happening. So not only should at the end of your discussion say, okay, well, yeah, somebody ought to do that. That's not quite enough. It is you've got to have somebody who's specifically responsible for the action. So once you've done that, then you summarize the main point at the end of each discussion topic and move on. That's the end of that discussion. You don't go back to it until you know, unless you need to in the next meeting or whatever. But that's finish the discussion and move on. Keep minutes. Have someone responsible for writing down what's going on and distribute them quickly, again, within that 24 hours after the meeting, if possible. So I have a link here on the end of the slide that's improve meeting management and management skills for effective meetings. That is a good, it's a good article for kind of getting an idea of how to do meetings well. So cross-departmental communication I mentioned earlier with especially with a maintenance organization. You are managing not only people that you specifically manage, but people who you work with as colleagues and people who are your boss. And so you're managing up, sideways, down, and all around, basically. So I mentioned making friends with your team supervisors is important. Keeping people, especially people above the stakeholders and the sponsors, aware of any issues. They should never be surprised by someone saying, oh, hey, did you hear about? They should always hear about issues and risks that have come true, and all the things that might happen, they should be hearing them from you. Your team should also be getting that information, but a lot of times the team is aware, and then you're the one who gets to tell the bosses. So just make sure that you're communicating adequately and sending all that the correct direction. Read. There are lots of books on how to communicate and manage up, down, and sideways. And take classes, learn about how to manage human beings. Even if you're not supervising anyone right now, if you have the opportunity to take a course on management, HR, human resources skills, take advantage of it, because that's incredibly important. Use a system to keep track of communications as well. I'm going to talk about these systems here in a bit, but using a system to keep track of communications, make sure that you get stuff done when you say you're going to do it, and that is vital. So I've listed a few. I mentioned the Kanban, the getting things done, the Pomodoro technique. Again, I'll mention that here in a bit. I talked a little bit about training your staff in project management. You can do that in many different ways. You can have a little project management minute or 10 in staff meetings where you talk about different parts of project management. You can have brown bag lunches for discussion of project management topics. A mentoring program is nice. If you've gotten somebody who has done a couple of projects, maybe team them up with someone who would like to get better at that. Formal classes, Library Juice, ALA groups, there are several that offer project management that are kind of specific to their particular focus. III consultants, et cetera, are different ways to get information about how to do project management and are useful for not only the project manager, but the people who work in the teams. I think on the first session, and certainly on the last slide or two here, have some book recommendations. So, you know, if you've got a staff book club, pick a How to PM title. Do that so that folks can figure out what can read through how to do project management. So I talked about the picking a system for time management. I've talked a little bit about getting things done. That is a time management by David Allen. He wrote a book on called Getting Things Done, and he has kind of a system, and it's a little complicated, or not complicated, it's a little involved, but totally doable. Then on the complete opposite end is the Pomodoro, which is basically you've got a little timer that you do 20-minute sprints, and then you stop. It's much less involved, much less overhead, but still a time management system. And then the Kanban system that I mentioned a few slides ago, that's that's the columns. You put everything into columns and you arrange things that way. My brain, the way it works is the Getting Things Done works for me. I've had coworkers, however, who have turned their whiteboards into Kanban boards, and that's how they think. Take a look at the different time management systems and find one that works for you. I have told you I'll be talking about how everybody's brain is different, and so not one time management system is going to work for everybody. So find a system you like, find a software or paper support system that works for you. Getting Things Done is a good fit for Asana, which is my personal project management tool of choice. Avoid analysis paralysis. You can spend so much time organizing that you get nothing done. Kind of like that analysis paralysis I talked about in how much time do you spend planning. You want to spend enough time to get things done, but not so much that you don't get any work done. Calendars are unbelievably useful. If most of these systems have calendaring techniques, and they are incredibly useful, and use them, make use of them, and make them trusted companions. Right at the moment, I'm at the point where if it's not in my calendar, it doesn't happen. I have to put everything in my calendar, which, you know, is just the way I'm thinking. And then make lists and make use of them. Even if you don't pick a formal system, just making a list at the end of the day of what you need to do the next day is helpful. So anybody here using a different kind of system? I'll go ahead and put this slide up real quickly so that you can see. These are some of the project management books that have been useful for people that I've heard of. There are, when I did this last week, 13,325 results for project management in the Amazon book department alone. Some of them are useful for project management professional certification. Some are less so. So here are some suggestions. And Elizabeth has asked if I'd heard of the RACI chart. That's responsibility, accountability, consult, and inform. I have heard of it. However, of course, now that you've asked me about it, I can't think of, I know it's a way to help with delegation. Whose responsibility is it to do a particular task? Who's accountable for a particular task or set of tasks? Who do you consult? about, and that could be, I mentioned subject matter experts earlier, and then informing who gets the report about what's going on. But honestly, that's all I can remember. I've never used one myself because I've never been in a project that's big enough that I need to worry about who's responsible for what beyond the Gantt chart. So I am not probably the person who's going to be best for for explaining this, but that's what I have run into it before. It is something that project managers use. I have not used it myself, and so I don't have a lot of advice for you there. And has there been any discussion of, sorry, coughing again, has there been any discussion of time management systems?
I know Elizabeth's question about the RACI chart also came through here, but we didn't have any other comments or things about that. I think, well, actually, I take that back. I'm sorry. I almost missed that one. Calendar came through in uppercase letters. Calendar, calendar, calendar.
Yes, calendars are important. Yeah, that's, if you're not used to putting everything in a calendar, I have a 22-year-old son. He's a fifth-year senior at Lawrenceburg in Missouri, and the first couple of years, he's had a smartphone since he was in high school. But the first couple of years of college, I kept, kind of poking at him, going, well, did you put it in your calendar? And I think he was a junior in college before he came home, and he's like, Mom, did you know I could add stuff to my calendar from my phone? This is life-changing. And I'm just sitting there going, yeah, that's what I've been telling you for 3 years, but, moms don't know anything. So it's having stuff in your calendar and trusting your calendar. And you can only trust your calendar if you put everything in it that needs to be. And that's a big thing with the getting things done, is that you have trust in systems, and you trust them because you use them. So calendars, 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 absolutely.
Robin, this is Nanette.
Oh, yes.
One of the things that I added in recently myself, because I live by my calendar as well, but as I'm balancing multiple projects, I had read about this, heard someone present on it, and I started using my calendar as a diary too, so that I was actually logging what I did against what was scheduled, and that turned out to be quite helpful in improving my estimating skills, as well as my lessons learned activities, because I work on long projects, and so it didn't get lost in, the day-to-day churn of a project. It was there, and I could go back at it, and gave me a tool to assess where we'd been, so that my lessons learned were grounded in reality, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. You said with the estimation, helping the estimation, having that information there that you took this long to do this particular task, that's a great point. It will make you better at estimating. So does anybody have any more questions? Or did you pick up one thing that you learned today, or yes, last week, that you will use at your library? Or one way that you will maybe work towards making your library more project-based? Have we got any answers for any of these?
Well, someone said they're going to be better, particularly I believe it's from the section on delegating and knowing the people on your team and making friends with your team member supervisors. Someone reported you're not the boss of me type of scenario, and so they picked up on skills that they'll use on their next project. There might be other things coming in, but so far that has been the one that's highlighted.
Okay. Well, we can also, are there any final questions? That's the next slide, and we're edging into running out of time. So
I have a note from Leah who says that it's helpful to remember that in adjusting to change, it's always personal. And she recommends, I guess it's a book she recommends, It's Always Personal, Navigating Emotion in the New Workplace by Ann Kramer.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, that is, change management is again, it's a topic that can be its own 2-week workshop, but it's hard for a lot of people, and people do tend to take it more personally sometimes than others might think is warranted. But yeah, that's a great, I'm jotting that down as well. And I tell you, every time I do one of these, I learn.
You give us a perfect segue. Actually, I was going to say, you give this question and this topic give us a perfect segue into December's hot topic, because December's hot topic is the fact that it is always personal and that we need to be mindful in our leadership. It's actually Mindful Management and Leadership Basics with Kim Cadell. So I love that that's where this piece tailored in. As a curriculum designer, it's nice when what you hope will happen as you're planning actually happens in reality. So that's a perfect tip. I have personally been working with Kim on this piece, and I really enjoyed it. It's a different perspective on something that I was aware of, but that just personalizes it more. So I hope you'll join us on the 5th and the 12th of December for those 2 sessions like these. You can register for them, and they will be included in the email that I send out to you by the end of the week, as soon as the recording and slides are available. So I feel like that's the piece I've been saying again and again in chat. Yes, all the links, all the resources will be made available to you as part of that email. And then I hope that you will join us on November 16th when Catherine Harnish, our new SVP, talks about following the leader and innovative future in libraries. One more, join us, is that if you'd like to explore any of these topics in deeper depth with some hands-on practice and with the experts themselves, we have our new library boot camps here. These hot topics are just a taste of them, and it helps you go beyond, right? Just the day-to-day work that we do today, moving us forward. Many of them are actually project-based activities, from mindful leadership and staff development to metadata boot camp, to the content that we deliver to folks as we're moving forward with institutional repositories and licensing electronic content, to the knowledge life cycle itself, so how intellectual property comes to be and where it goes over the process, and finally the business of library boot camp, so those things we might be using project management for as we implement new services in our libraries. And we do have, you can sign up here. Obviously, I'm into the happy graphics this week, but you can sign up at III.com under our workshops page, and we have a full integrated calendar and now inline signups, which you can pay directly, or we'll also issue you a PO for your traditional pay process. And then lastly, I just want to say that please do tell us what you think. We're here to listen. There's surveys included. There's emails included in that email that you get from coming here. If you go to our website, you can click on our services forms, but we really do want to hear how we can help you, whether our new Beyond the ILS topics are meeting what you need, what else you would like to see. We're here to help. Most of us take that little epithet at the bottom of our cards quite seriously, that we really are here to be your library success partner. And Ann and I hope that you'll contact us. If you have any final questions for Robin, include them there as well, and we'll pass them along. And we thank you for your time today. We hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we look forward to seeing you in December. And with that, I'll close out the session.
Thank you.